I found him shivering under a torn sleeping bag in my sister's garage at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night in November. 12 years old, wearing the same clothes he'd had on 3 days earlier, trying to do homework by the light of his phone because there was no electricity out there. When I asked where his mother was, he whispered, "Aunt Delilah says this is my punishment for talking back." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Hayes, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because what I discovered in that freezing garage in Millfield and what I did about it in the hours that followed changed not just one child's life, but exposed a family secret that had been hiding in plain sight for months. But let me start from the beginning, because the phone call that led me to that garage came at the worst possible time, from the last person I expected to hear from. It was 10:47 p.m., and I was finally settling into my couch after a brutal 14-hour day at the pediatric clinic where I work as a nurse practitioner. I just kicked off my shoes and poured myself a glass of wine when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail. Unknown numbers after 10 p.m. usually meant either emergencies or telemarketers, and I was too exhausted for either. But something made me answer. "Hello? Catherine? It's me, it's Ethan." Ethan, my 12-year-old nephew, the son of my sister Delilah, who I hadn't spoken to in 6 months after our last explosive argument about her parenting choices. The boy I'd been forbidden to see because Delilah claimed I was undermining her authority as his mother. "Ethan?" I sat up straight, instantly alert. "Sweetheart, how did you get this number? Where are you calling from?" "I found your card in Mom's purse," he whispered. "Catherine, I'm scared. I'm so cold, and I don't know what to do." The fear in his voice sent ice through my veins. "Where are you, honey? Where's your mom?" "She's inside with Derek. They said I can't come in until I learn to show respect. It's been 3 days, Catherine. I'm sleeping in the garage and there's no heat, and I'm so hungry." Derek. My sister's boyfriend of 8 months, a man I'd met exactly once and immediately disliked. Something about the way he looked at Ethan, something about the way Delilah changed when he was around. Smaller, more defensive, quicker to snap at her son for normal kid behavior. 3 days? I was already reaching for my keys. "Ethan, listen to me very carefully. I'm coming to get you right now. Stay where you are, stay on the phone with me, and don't let anyone take the phone away from you." "Catherine, you can't come here. Mom said if you ever showed up again, she'd call the police. She said you're not allowed to interfere with her parenting anymore." Not allowed to interfere with her parenting. 6 months ago, I'd noticed bruises on Ethan's arms during a family barbecue. When I asked him about them privately, he told me Derek grabbed him too hard when he was being mouthy. When I confronted Delilah, she'd exploded at me, accusing me of trying to turn her son against her boyfriend, of being jealous that she'd found someone who actually wanted to be part of a family. "Derek's been nothing but patient with Ethan," she'd screamed at me in her driveway when neighbors pretended not to listen. "But you wouldn't understand that because you've never had kids. You've never had to deal with a stubborn, disrespectful 12-year-old who thinks he can do whatever he wants." The accusation stung because it was partially true. I'd never had children of my own, though not by choice. Years of fertility treatments, 2 miscarriages, and a marriage that couldn't survive the strain of our childlessness had left me with an empty house and a career caring for other people's children. But it also made me fiercely protective of kids who couldn't protect themselves. "I maybe don't have children," I told Delilah that day, "but I have eyes, and I have a professional obligation to report suspected child abuse when I see it." That's when she'd banned me from seeing Ethan. "If you ever tried to involve social services in my family, I'll make sure you never see him again. He's my son, not yours. Remember that." I'd back down then, convinced myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Derek would prove to be better than my first impression. Maybe Delilah would protect her son if things got truly serious. I'd been wrong. Ethan, sweetheart, I need you to tell me exactly what's been happening. Not just the garage, everything. How long has Derek been living with you guys?
Since August, right after school started. 4 months. 4 months of this man living with my sister and her vulnerable child, and I'd been shut out from witnessing what was happening. And has Derek hurt you? I mean, besides grabbing your arm too hard? There was a long pause. Then, in a voice so small I could barely hear it over the road noise, he hits me sometimes. When Mom's not looking. He says it's not abuse if it doesn't leave marks. And anyway, I deserve it for being a brat. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What about your mom? Does she know? I tried to tell her once, but Derek was right there, and he said I was lying to cause trouble. Mom believed him. She said I was trying to manipulate her by making up stories about Derek. I pulled into Delilah's driveway at 11:23 p.m. The house was dark except for the flickering blue light of a television in the living room window. The garage, a detached structure at the back of the property, was completely black. Ethan, I'm here. I'm going to hang up now and come get you, okay? Catherine, what if Mom calls the police? What if she says you're kidnapping me? What if she did? What if I walked into that garage, took my nephew out of there, and Delilah had me arrested for interfering with her parenting rights? What if the system sided with the biological mother over the concerned aunt? What if my intervention made things worse for Ethan in the long run? All of these thoughts flashed through my mind in the 3 seconds it took me to walk from my car to the garage door. Then I opened it and saw him. Ethan was huddled in the corner on a bare concrete floor, wrapped in what looked like an old moving blanket that was torn and filthy. There was no heat, no insulation, no proper lighting. A few of his school books were scattered around him, and I could see he'd been trying to do math homework in the glow of his dying phone. He looked up when I opened the door, and I saw something in his 12-year-old eyes that no child should ever have. Resignation. He wasn't surprised to see me. He wasn't relieved. He was just tired. Tired of being cold. Tired of being hungry. Tired of being unwanted by the people who were supposed to love him most. "Hi, Catherine," he said quietly. "I knew you'd come." I knelt beside him and touched his face. His skin was ice cold, his lips had a blue tinge that made my medical training scream danger signals. This was not punishment. This was neglect that could have killed him. "How long have you been out here tonight, baby?" "Since yesterday morning. Derek said I couldn't come in until I wrote a 10-page essay about respecting adults and apologizing for my attitude." "Have you eaten anything?" He shook his head. "Mom brought me a peanut butter sandwich yesterday, but Derek said I didn't deserve it because my essay wasn't good enough." I looked around the garage more carefully. No toilet facilities, no running water, a heat stator that was unplugged and pushed into the corner. Clearly, they hadn't even given him that basic courtesy. This wasn't discipline. This was abuse, and it was happening to a child I loved, while I'd been respecting my sister's wishes to stay away. "Ethan, we're leaving, right now." "But Catherine," "No buts. Get your school stuff. You're never sleeping in this garage again." As I helped him gather his homework and the few belongings scattered around the concrete floor, I made a mental inventory of everything I was seeing. The torn blanket that smelled of motor oil and dampness, the concrete floor with no padding or insulation, the temperature that had to be in the 40s, if not lower, the lack of basic human necessities. Any one of these things would constitute neglect in my professional opinion. Together they painted a picture of systematic abuse disguised as punishment. We were halfway to my car when the front door of the house opened and Delilah appeared, silhouetted against the living room light behind her. "Catherine, what the hell are you doing here?" I kept walking, Ethan's small hand gripped tightly in mine. "I'm taking Ethan home with me." "Like hell you are." Delilah marched down the front steps, her voice rising to the pitch I remembered from our childhood arguments. "Put him down. You have no right to be here, and you have no right to take my son anywhere." I stopped at my car door and looked at my sister. Really looked at her, for the first time in 6 months. She was thinner than I remembered, her hair unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, but it was her eyes that shocked me. They were hard in a way I'd never seen before. defensive and angry, and completely lacking the maternal protectiveness I would have expected from a mother whose child had just been found living in an unheated garage. "Delilah," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional, "Ethan has been sleeping in your garage for 3 days with no heat, no proper bedding, and no food. That's not punishment. That's neglect. That's discipline," she snapped back. "Something you wouldn't understand because you've never had to raise a difficult child. Ethan has been impossible lately, talking back, being disrespectful to Derek, acting like he runs this house. He needs to learn consequences." "Consequences for what? For not wanting to obey your boyfriend? For asserting normal preteen independence? For being a 12-year-old kid?" Derek appeared behind Delilah then, and I felt Ethan's hand tighten in mine. Even in the dim porch light, I could see that Derek was a big man, probably 6 feet tall, heavy set, with the kind of presence that was meant to intimidate. He was wearing a tank top despite the November cold, and I could see tattoos covering his arms. "Is there a problem here, ladies?" His voice was deceptively casual, but I could hear the threat underneath it. "No problem," I said, opening my car door. "I'm just taking Ethan home with me."
I don't think so. Derek stepped closer, and I positioned myself between him and Ethan. The boy's being punished for disrespect. He doesn't get to run away to Auntie Catherine every time Mama tells him no. Sleeping in an unheated garage isn't punishment, Derek. It's abuse. And I'm a mandated reporter, which means I'm legally obligated to report suspected child abuse when I see it. The words were out before I could stop them, but I didn't regret them. Let them know exactly what they were dealing with. Delilah's face went pale. "Catherine, you wouldn't dare. Watch me." I helped Ethan into the passenger seat of my car and closed the door. Through the window, I could see him hunched in on himself, exhausted and scared, but safe for the first time in days. "Delilah," I said, turning back to my sister, "I'm taking Ethan home with me tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to have a conversation about what happens next. But right now, that child needs food, warmth, and a safe place to sleep." "You can't just take someone's kid," Derek interjected, moving even closer. "That's kidnapping." Actually, in cases of immediate danger to a child's welfare, family members can provide emergency protective custody pending investigation by proper authorities. I was grateful for the child welfare law class I'd taken as part of my nursing continuing education, and I have 12 years of documentation of my relationship with Ethan, plus professional credentials as a pediatric healthcare provider. It wasn't entirely true. Emergency protective custody was more complicated than I was making it sound, but Derek didn't know that, and I was counting on Delilah's ignorance of family law to buy me time. "This isn't over, Catherine," Delilah said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. "You can't just waltz in here and steal my son because you disagree with my parenting methods." I got into my car and rolled down the window. "Delilah, if you want your son back, you need to provide him with basic human necessities: food, shelter, warmth, safety. If you can't do that, then yes, I will absolutely take him away from you." As I backed out of the driveway, I could see Derek and Delilah arguing on the front porch, their voices raised but their words indistinct. Beside me, Ethan was staring straight ahead, not looking back at the house where he'd lived his entire life. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked as we turned onto the main road. "I think so. Catherine, what's going to happen now? Will I have to go back?" The question broke my heart because I didn't have a good answer. Legally, I was in murky territory. Morally, I was absolutely certain I'd done the right thing. But the gap between legal and moral could be the difference between saving Ethan and losing him forever. "I don't know, baby, but I promise you this: you're never sleeping in that garage again. Whatever I have to do, wherever we have to go, that's never happening again." As we drove through the quiet streets of Millfield toward my house, I was already making plans. Tomorrow, I would call Child Protective Services and file a formal report. I would document everything I'd seen that night with photographs and detailed notes. I would contact a family law attorney and find out exactly what my rights were as Ethan's aunt. But tonight, I was going to feed my nephew a hot meal, draw him a warm bath,
and let him sleep in a real bed with clean sheets and central heating. Because sometimes, when you love someone, you don't wait for permission to save them. Sometimes you just pick up the phone and make the call that changes everything. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November sunlight that usually makes me grateful for small mercies. But as I stood in my kitchen at 6 a.m., making pancakes and watching Ethan sleep on my living room couch, gratitude was the furthest thing from my mind. Instead, I was calculating. How much time did I have before Delilah called the police? How much evidence did I need to protect Ethan legally? And most importantly, how many other times had my nephew suffered while I'd been respecting my sister's wishes to stay away? Ethan had finally fallen asleep around 2 a.m. after 2 hot baths, a full meal, and what felt like an hour of quiet sobbing into my shoulder. When I'd helped him into clean pajamas, a pair I'd bought months ago, hoping he'd visit again, I'd documented every bruise, every mark, every sign of neglect I could see. As a healthcare professional, I knew that documentation would be crucial for what came next. What came next was a phone call that would change everything. At 7:30 a.m., while Ethan was still sleeping and I was reviewing my notes from the previous night, my phone rang. Not Delilah, as I'd expected, but a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. Miss Hayes, this is Detective Laura Martinez with the Millfield Police Department. I understand you removed a minor child from his mother's custody last night without legal authorization. My blood ran cold. Delilah had called the police, just as she'd threatened. I'd been so focused on getting Ethan to safety that I hadn't fully considered the legal ramifications of what I'd done. Detective Martinez, yes, I did take my nephew from what I observed to be an unsafe living situation. I'm a mandated reporter and a licensed healthcare provider. I was acting in what I believed to be the child's immediate best interests. Ma'am, I need you to understand that regardless of your professional credentials, removing a child from parental custody can constitute kidnapping under state law. I'm going to need you to bring the child to the station this morning so we can sort this situation out. I looked toward the living room where Ethan was still curled up on my couch, the first peaceful sleep he'd had in days written across his face.
Detective, before I do that, I'd like you to know that I'm filing a Child Protective Services report this morning based on my observations last night. This child was found sleeping on a concrete garage floor in near-freezing temperatures, with no food, no heat, and no sanitary facilities. There was a pause. Ma'am, are you saying you witnessed evidence of child abuse or neglect? I'm saying I witnessed a 12-year-old child living in conditions that would constitute criminal neglect in any jurisdiction, and I have documentation to support that claim. Another pause, longer this time. When Detective Martinez spoke again, her tone had shifted from authoritative to investigative. Ms. Hayes, I think we need to have a more detailed conversation. Can you bring the child to the station at 10 a.m. and bring whatever documentation you mentioned? I'll have a CPS caseworker there as well. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long moment, staring at my phone and fighting the urge to pack a bag, wake up Ethan, and drive to my cousin's house in another state. But running would only make things worse for both of us. The only way through this was to trust the system I'd spent my career working within. At 8 a.m., I called my supervisor at the pediatric clinic and explained that I needed an emergency personal day to deal with a family crisis. Dr. Rebecca Foster had been my mentor for 5 years, and she knew about my concerns regarding Ethan. "Catherine, please tell me you didn't do anything that could jeopardize your nursing license," she said after I gave her a carefully edited version of the previous night's events. "I acted as a mandated reporter, responding to evidence of child neglect," I replied. "But Becca, I need a favor. Can you recommend a family law attorney who specializes in child welfare cases?" "I can do better than that. My sister-in-law is Amanda Chen. She's a family court attorney who handles a lot of CPS cases. Let me call her right now." 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with Amanda Chen, explaining my situation while Ethan ate pancakes at my kitchen table. He looked better in daylight, less gaunt, less frightened, but I could still see the exhaustion and trauma in his 12-year-old eyes. "Catherine, I'm going to be straight with you," Amanda said after I finished my account. "Legally, you're in a gray area. You had reasonable cause to believe the child was in immediate danger, which gives you some protection under emergency intervention statutes. But taking him without calling authorities first complicates things. So what do I do now? Now, you cooperate fully with the investigation. You provide all your documentation to CPS. You answer every question honestly. And you pray that what you documented last night is enough to justify your actions. And if it's not, then you could face criminal charges for custodial interference, and Ethan goes back to his mother with no legal protection. I looked at my nephew, who was listening to my side of the conversation with the kind of adult attention that 12-year-olds shouldn't need to have. Catherine, can I ask you to meet us at the police station? I think I need professional representation for this. I'll be there at 9:45. After I hung up, Ethan pushed his plate away and looked at me with those two old eyes. Catherine, am I going to have to go back? To the garage? I reached across the table and took his small hand in mine. Ethan, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you never sleep in that garage again. But I need you to understand that this might get complicated. There might be people who ask you questions about what's been happening at home. He nodded solemnly. Like what kind of questions? Questions about Derek, about how your mom has been treating you, about whether you feel safe at home. What should I tell them? The truth, sweetheart. Just the truth. At 9:45 a.m., Amanda Chen met us in the parking lot of the Millfield Police Department. She was a small, fierce-looking woman in her 40s, with the kind of professional presence that immediately commanded respect. Ethan, she said, kneeling to his eye level, I'm a lawyer, and I'm here to help both you and your Aunt Catherine navigate this situation. You're not in trouble, okay? But some people are going to ask you questions about what's been happening at home, and it's important that you tell them the truth. Even if it makes Mom mad? Amanda's expression softened. Even if it makes your mom mad. Sometimes adults make mistakes, and when that happens, other adults need to step in to keep kids safe. The police station conference room felt sterile and intimidating, even with the attempts at child-friendly decorating. Detective Martinez was waiting with a woman I didn't know, mid-30s, professional but warm, with a briefcase and a kind smile. Miss Hayes, I'm Sarah Winters, the CPS caseworker assigned to this situation. Thank you for coming in voluntarily. I handed over the file I'd prepared that morning, photographs of the garage, detailed notes about Ethan's condition when I found him, medical observations about his physical state, and a chronological account of my concerns about his welfare over the past 6 months. Sarah reviewed the documents, while Detective Martinez asked Ethan gentle questions about the previous few days. His answers were matter-of-fact, delivered in the kind of flat tone that children use when they're describing trauma they've learned to accept as normal. Yes, he'd been sleeping in the garage since Monday morning. No, there was no heat or bathroom facilities. Yes, Derek had hit him before, usually when his mom wasn't looking. No, his mom didn't believe him when he tried to tell her about it. Ethan, Sarah said, can you tell me about other times you've been punished like this? Has your mom made you sleep in the garage before? Not the garage, but sometimes I have to sleep on the kitchen floor if Derek says I've been disrespectful. And sometimes I don't get dinner if I argue with him about homework or chores.
I watched Sarah's face as she took notes. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her pen pressed harder against the paper with each of Ethan's revelations. How long has Derek been living with you and your mom? Since the beginning of the school year. Mom says he's going to be my new dad, but I don't want a new dad. I told her that, and that's when the punishments got worse. Detective Martinez leaned forward. Ethan, when you say Derek hits you, can you show us where? Ethan looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing faded bruises on his forearms. He lifted his shirt slightly, showing a dark mark on his ribs that I hadn't seen the night before. He says it's not abuse if it doesn't leave permanent marks, Ethan said quietly. And he says if I tell anyone, he'll make sure I go into foster care where nobody will want me. The room went quiet except for the sound of Sarah's pen scratching across paper. Finally, Detective Martinez spoke. Miss Hayes, based on what I'm hearing and seeing here,
I believe you acted appropriately in removing this child from what appears to be an abusive situation. However, we still need to follow proper procedures." "What does that mean?" Amanda asked. "It means CPS will conduct a full investigation of the home environment, and in the meantime, Ethan will need to be placed in protective custody." My heart sank. Protective custody, meaning foster care? Not necessarily. If there's a suitable relative who can provide care, and if that relative passes a background check and home inspection, the child can be placed with family during the investigation. I looked at Amanda, who nodded slightly. "I'd like to formally request kinship placement," I said. "I'm Ethan's aunt, I'm a licensed healthcare professional with no criminal history, and I have a stable home environment." "We'll need to conduct a home study," Sarah said, "but based on your professional credentials and the circumstances that brought us here today, I'm inclined to recommend temporary kinship placement pending the outcome of our investigation." "How long will the investigation take?" "Typically 30 to 45 days for a full assessment. We'll need to interview Delilah Hayes and Derek Morrison, inspect the home environment, and gather additional evidence about the child's treatment." Derek Morrison. I hadn't known his last name until that moment, but hearing it spoken aloud in an official context made everything feel more real, more serious. "What happens during those 30 to 45 days?" I asked. "Ethan stays with you under court-supervised kinship care. Delilah will be offered parenting classes and counseling services. Derek will be required to move out of the home immediately and have no contact with Ethan during the investigation. And if Delilah refuses to cooperate?" Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Then we move toward termination of parental rights and permanent placement with you or another suitable relative." The weight of that possibility settled over me like a heavy blanket. I'd walked into that garage last night thinking I was making a temporary rescue. Now I was potentially looking at becoming Ethan's permanent guardian, responsible for raising my sister's child because she'd chosen her abusive boyfriend over her son's welfare. "There's one more thing," Detective Martinez said. "Based on Ethan's testimony about physical abuse, we'll be filing criminal charges against Derek Morrison. Assault on a minor, child endangerment, possibly more depending on what else our investigation uncovers." I felt a fierce satisfaction at those words. Derek would face legal consequences for what he'd done to my nephew. But I also felt a gnawing worry about what this would mean for my relationship with Delilah. As if reading my thoughts, Amanda leaned over and whispered, "You did the right thing, Catherine. Whatever happens with your sister, you saved that child." The rest of the meeting involved paperwork, scheduling, and logistics. Sarah would conduct a home study of my house that afternoon. A family court judge would review the temporary kinship placement within 48 hours. Delilah would be served with court papers requiring her cooperation with the investigation. As we walked out of the police station, Ethan slipped his hand into mine. "Catherine, what if Mom never forgives me for telling the truth?" I stopped walking and knelt down to his eye level, the way Amanda had done earlier. "Ethan, listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for the adults in your life making bad choices. You are not responsible for Derek hurting you. You are not responsible for your mom choosing to protect him instead of you. The only thing you're responsible for is telling the truth and letting the people who love you keep you safe." "Do you love me?" The question hit me like a physical blow. This child who had been neglected and abused by the people who should have protected him most was asking if he was worthy of love. "Oh, sweetheart, I love you more than you could understand. I loved you the day you were born. I loved you when I taught you to ride a bike. I loved you when you called me crying from that garage, and I love you right now. That's never going to change, no matter what happens with your mom or Derek or anyone else."
He hugged me then, a fierce 12-year-old hug that felt like trust and hope and relief all rolled together. That afternoon, Sarah Winters connected her home study. She inspected the guest bedroom that would become Ethan's room, reviewed my professional credentials, and interviewed me about my plans for his care. By 5 p.m., I had temporary legal custody of my nephew, with a court date scheduled for the following week to formalize the arrangement. At 6 p.m., my phone rang with Delilah's number. I almost didn't answer, but Amanda had advised me to document all contact with my sister during the investigation. Delilah. Catherine.
Don't. Just don't. You've destroyed my family. You've taken my son away from me. And for what? Because you think you know better than me how to raise him? I took him away from an abusive situation that could have killed him. Derek's gone, she said. Are you happy now? The police came and arrested him this morning. He lost his job. I lost the man I love. And now I'm losing my son, too. You haven't lost Ethan. He's still your son. But he needs to be safe, Delilah. He needs... She hung up on me. I stared at my phone for a long moment, feeling the finality of that disconnected call. My sister, the person I'd shared a childhood with, who I'd helped through every crisis of her adult life, now saw me as the enemy who had destroyed her happiness. But as I walked into the living room and saw Ethan doing homework at my dining table, warm, fed, safe, and surrounded by the kind of stable environment every child deserves, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes love means making the hard call. Sometimes love means being willing to be hated by the people you're trying to save. And sometimes love means making that one phone call that changes everything, even when you know there's no going back. Tomorrow, we would start building a new normal. Tonight, I was just grateful that my nephew would sleep in a real bed, in a heated room, in a house where no one would hurt him for being a child. The rest, we would figure out as we went. The first 3 weeks of kinship custody passed in a carefully orchestrated routine designed to give Ethan stability while the investigation unfolded around us. School in the morning, pediatric clinic visits for me in the afternoon, homework and dinner together in the evening. But underneath the veneer of normalcy, I could feel the storm building. It started with the voicemails. Catherine, this is ridiculous. Ethan belongs at home with me, not playing house with his spinster aunt who doesn't know the first thing about raising boys. Delilah's voice on Tuesday morning, sharp with a bitterness I'd never heard before. You've turned my own son against me. Do you know he won't even take my phone calls? 12 years old, and he's screening his calls because his precious Aunt Catherine has filled his head with lies about his mother. Wednesday afternoon, the pain underneath the anger starting to show. The social worker came by again today, asked me about the garage, about Derek, about things that are none of her damn business. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To humiliate me in front of strangers, to make me look like some kind of monster? Thursday evening, desperation creeping into her tone. I saved every voicemail, documented every text message, following Amanda Chen's advice to maintain a complete record of all communications. But listening to my sister's voice grow more unhinged with each passing day was like watching someone drown in slow motion. The breaking point came on a Friday morning in early December, 3 weeks after I'd taken Ethan from that garage. I was reviewing patient charts at the clinic when my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan's school. Please call immediately. Situation with Ethan requires parent or guardian contact. My heart stopped. I called the school while grabbing my keys, already imagining the worst-case scenarios that come naturally to someone who works in pediatric healthcare. Miss Hayes, this is Principal Anderson. Ethan is physically fine, but we had an incident this morning that requires your immediate attention. What kind of incident? His mother showed up during recess and attempted to remove him from school grounds without authorization. When our security guard intervened, she became agitated. The police have been called. I was already in my car, speeding toward Millbrook Elementary. Where is Ethan now? He's in my office with the school counselor. Miss Hayes, I have to tell you, the child was terrified. When he saw his mother approaching the playground, he ran to a teacher and begged her not to let him leave with her. The image of my nephew, scared and running from his own mother, made my chest tighten with a rage I'd been trying to suppress for weeks. I arrived at the school to find 2 police cars in the parking lot and Delilah sitting in the back of one of them, her hands restrained behind her back. She saw me walking toward the building and started screaming. Catherine, you have to tell them I'm not a danger to my own child. Tell them I just wanted to see him. I didn't stop walking. Inside the school, I found Ethan curled up in a chair in Principal Anderson's office, his face pale and his hands shaking. The school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was sitting beside him, speaking in gentle, reassuring tones. Ethan, sweetheart, I knelt beside his chair. Are you okay? Are you hurt? He shook his head but didn't speak. Instead, he reached for me and I pulled him into a hug that felt like he was trying to disappear inside my arms. She said Derek wants to see me, he whispered against my shoulder. She said if I came with her, we could all be a family again. But Catherine, I don't want to see Derek. I don't want to be a family with him. Principal Anderson cleared his throat. Miss Hayes, according to our records, you have temporary guardianship, but Mrs. Morrison... Morrison? I looked up sharply. Her name is Hayes, Delilah Hayes. Actually, according to the identification she showed our security guard, she's now Delilah Morrison. It appears she married Derek Morrison sometime in the past 2 weeks. The room went silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Delilah had married Derek while he was facing criminal charges for abusing her son, while she was supposedly taking parenting classes as part of her court-mandated rehabilitation, while she was fighting to regain custody of the child he'd been systematically abusing. She'd chosen him again. Permanently.
Where is she now? I managed to ask. Detained for attempted custodial interference and trespassing on school property. The officers are waiting to speak with you about pressing charges. I looked down at Ethan, who was still clinging to me like a lifeline. What do you want to do, baby? This is about your safety, so you get to have a voice in this decision. He lifted his head and looked at me with those 2 old eyes that had seemed too much for 12 years of life. I want to stay with you. I want Mom to get better, but I don't want to live with Derek. And if she's married to him... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I made the decision that I'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. Principal Anderson, I'll be pressing charges, and I'll be petitioning the court for permanent custody. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Amanda Chen's law office with a stack of new documents and a new reality. Delilah's marriage to Derek while the abuse investigation was ongoing had fundamentally changed the legal landscape. Catherine, this actually strengthens your position significantly, Amanda explained. By marrying him while he's facing criminal charges for abusing Ethan, she's demonstrated that she prioritizes her relationship with him over her child's safety. No family court judge is going to overlook that. What does this mean for the custody case? It means we're no longer talking about temporary kinship placement. We're talking about permanent guardianship, possibly adoption. And given the circumstances, I believe we have a very strong case. I stared out Amanda's office window at the December afternoon, gray and cold, watching people hurry along the sidewalks below. Somewhere in this same city, my sister was sitting in a jail cell, probably blaming me for the consequences of her own choices. Somewhere else, Derek Morrison was free on bail, planning to become a stepfather to the child he'd been systematically abusing. Amanda, I need you to be completely honest with me. If I pursue permanent custody, what are the chances I'll actually get it? Based on the evidence? The documented abuse? The marriage to the abuser? The attempted school kidnapping? The pattern of prioritizing her relationship over her child's welfare? I'd say 90%. And the other 10%? Family courts can be unpredictable. Some judges believe children belong with biological parents no matter what. But Catherine, even if that happened, do you really think you could live with yourself if you didn't fight for him? She was right. I'd crossed the line 3 weeks ago when I walked into that garage. There was no going back now. That evening, I sat Ethan down for the hardest conversation of both our lives. Ethan, we need to talk about what happens next. With your mom, with living here, with everything. He was quiet for a moment, playing with the hem of his sweater, a new one I'd bought him because all his clothes were too small, another sign of the neglect he'd been enduring. Is Mom really married to Derek now? Yes, sweetheart, she is. So if I go back to live with her, Derek would be there too, as my stepfather. That's right. He was quiet for a long time, processing this information with the kind of analytical thinking that reminded me he was far more mature than any 12-year-old should have to be. Catherine, can I ask you something? Anything. If you become my guardian permanently, would that mean you'd be like my mom? Like, legally? I chose my words carefully. It would mean I'd have the legal responsibility to take care of you, make decisions about your health and education, and provide you with a safe home. It wouldn't change the fact that Delilah is your biological mother, but it would mean you'd live with me and I'd be responsible for your welfare. And Derek couldn't hurt me anymore? Derek would have no legal rights regarding you at all. None. And I could stay in my school and keep seeing Dr. Peterson? He'd started therapy 2 weeks earlier to process the trauma of the abuse. Yes, to both. He was quiet again, thinking. Finally, I want to stay with you, not just for now, but permanently. Is that okay? The question broke my heart and healed it at the same time. This child, who had been failed by the people who should have protected him most, was choosing me, choosing safety, choosing stability, choosing a future where he didn't have to sleep on garage floors or dodge his stepfather's fists. Ethan, it's more than okay. I want you to stay with me permanently too. But I need you to understand that this means your relationship with your mom is going to change. Maybe forever. I know. His voice was small, but steady. I still love her, but I can't live with Derek, and she chose him over me, so I choose you. The custody hearing was scheduled for the second week of December, just over a month after I'd found Ethan in that garage. Amanda had prepared me for what to expect. Testimony from CPS workers, school officials, healthcare providers, and possibly Ethan himself if the judge deemed it necessary. What I hadn't prepared for was seeing Delilah walk into that courtroom looking like a stranger. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her hair was unkempt and her clothes looked like she'd been sleeping in them. But it was her eyes that shocked me, flat and hard and completely empty of the warmth I remembered from our childhood. Derek was beside her, cleaned up for court, in an ill-fitting suit, but his presence filled the space with a kind of toxic energy that made my skin crawl. Even from across the courtroom, I could see why Ethan was afraid of him. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Sarah Winters testified about the conditions she'd found during her investigation of Delilah's home. Dr. Foster testified about the medical evidence of abuse and neglect. Principal Anderson testified about Ethan's improved academic performance and emotional stability since coming to live with me.
When Delilah took the stand, she was defiant. Your Honor, my sister has turned my son against me through manipulation and lies. She's always been jealous of my relationship with Ethan, and she's used the situation to steal him from me. Mrs. Morrison, the judge said, can you explain why you married the man who was facing criminal charges for abusing your son? Derek never abused anyone. Ethan made up those stories because he didn't want me to have a relationship. He's always been a manipulative child who— Ma'am, the judge interrupted, are you testifying that your 12-year-old son fabricated evidence of physical abuse because he was jealous of your boyfriend? The question hung in the air like poison. I watched Delilah's face as she realized how her words sounded in the stark environment of a courtroom. Derek loves Ethan. He was trying to teach him discipline and respect. Sometimes children need firm guidance. Firm guidance that resulted in bruises, malnutrition,
And a child sleeping on a concrete floor in an unheated garage? Delilah's lawyer whispered something urgent in her ear, but she ignored him. Ethan was being punished for disrespect. He needed to learn that actions have consequences. That's when I knew we'd won. Not because of Amanda's legal strategy or the weight of evidence, but because Delilah had just told a family court judge that she believed forcing a 12-year-old to sleep in an unheated garage was appropriate discipline. Judge Patricia Hawkins deliberated for 20 minutes before returning with her decision. In the matter of custody of minor child Ethan Hayes, the court finds that the biological mother has demonstrated a pattern of prioritizing her adult relationships over her child's welfare and safety. The court further finds that she has failed to protect the minor child from documented physical and emotional abuse. I felt Amanda squeeze my hand under the table. The court hereby awards permanent guardianship of Ethan Hayes to Catherine Hayes, with the right to petition for adoption after a 6-month stability period. Mrs. Morrison's parental rights are suspended pending completion of mandatory counseling and parenting classes, with supervised visitation only if and when the court deems it appropriate. It was over. Ethan was mine. Legally, officially, permanently mine. But as we walked out of that courtroom, I heard Delilah's voice one last time, raw with pain and rage. "You took everything from me, Catherine. My son, my husband, my family. I hope you're happy." I turned around to face my sister, this woman I'd loved and fought for, and ultimately had to fight against to save her child. "Delilah, I didn't take Ethan from you. I took him from a garage where he was sleeping on concrete in November because you thought it was appropriate punishment for a 12-year-old to speak up for himself. I didn't destroy your family. I saved the only innocent person in it." She stared at me with those flat, empty eyes, and I realized that the sister I'd grown up with, the woman who used to call me crying when boyfriends broke up with her, who used to trust me with her deepest fears and biggest dreams, that person was gone. In her place was someone who had chosen an abusive man over her own child's safety and who blamed everyone but herself for the consequences of that choice. As we walked to the parking lot, Ethan slipped his hand into mine. "Catherine, are you sad about Mom?" I looked down at this brave, resilient child who had survived more trauma in 12 years than most people endure in a lifetime, and who was now worried about my feelings. "I'm sad about what happened to our family, sweetheart, but I'm not sad about the choice we made. You're safe now. You're home. And that's worth everything." That night, we celebrated with pizza and ice cream and a movie marathon that went way past his usual bedtime. But as I tucked him into his permanent bed, in his permanent room, in his permanent home, I felt the weight of what we'd been through settling over both of us. "Catherine," his voice was sleepy but serious. "Yeah, baby? Do you think Mom will ever get better? Do you think she'll ever choose me over Derek?" I sat on the edge of his bed in the darkness, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know, Ethan. I hope so. But what I do know is that you don't have to wait for her to make that choice. You don't have to earn love by accepting mistreatment. You deserve to be safe and loved and valued exactly as you are right now, today." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I love you too, Catherine." As I turned off his light and closed his door, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not the courtroom decision or the legal documents, but a 12-year-old boy sleeping peacefully in a warm bed, secure in the knowledge that the person responsible for his care would never let him be hurt again. Tomorrow, we would start building whatever came next. But tonight, for the first time in months, both of us could sleep without fear. The phone call that started everything had ended in the only way it could, with a child safe and a family forever changed. 6 months after the custody hearing, I stood in the kitchen of what had become our home, watching Ethan pack his lunch for the last day of 7th grade. The transformation was remarkable, not just in him, but in the life we'd built together. Gone was the withdrawn, fearful child I'd found in that garage. In his place was a confident 12-year-old who complained about math homework,
left his soccer cleats by the front door, and filled our house with the ordinary chaos of a normal childhood. But the most extraordinary change wasn't in me.
Catherine, can I invite Jake and Marcus over for pizza tonight? It's Friday, and we don't have practice this weekend. Ethan was stuffing his backpack with the kind of casual confidence that still amazed me. The assumption that his requests would be considered fairly, that his home was a place where friends were welcome, and that the adult in his life wanted him to be happy. Of course, but homework first, and you need to clean your room before they come over. He groaned dramatically, a perfectly normal 12-year-old response that filled me with more joy than any parent had a right to feel over their child's complaints. Also, I added, sliding a permission slip across the counter, Dr. Peterson wants to see us both next week for your 6-month progress evaluation. She says you're doing remarkably well, but she wants to check in before we start the adoption paperwork. The adoption paperwork. Even saying the word still felt surreal. In 3 weeks, I would legally become Ethan's mother, not just his guardian. He would become my son, not just my responsibility. After months of legal proceedings, social worker visits, and psychological evaluations, we were finally approaching the finish line. "Are you nervous about the adoption?" Ethan asked, echoing my thoughts with the kind of emotional intelligence that therapy had helped him develop. Nervous isn't the right word. Grateful, maybe. Proud. A little overwhelmed by how much our lives have changed. Good overwhelmed or bad overwhelmed? I looked at this child who had taught me more about love, courage, and resilience in 6 months than I'd learned in 34 years of living, and felt my heart do that little flip it did whenever I fully grasped the magnitude of what we'd built together. The best kind of overwhelmed. That afternoon, while Ethan was at soccer practice, I drove to Riverside Cemetery to visit a grave I hadn't been to in over a year. My mother's headstone was simple granite with her name, dates, and a line from her favorite psalm, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." I sat on the bench beside her grave and talked to her the way I used to when she was alive, telling her about Ethan's latest soccer goal, his improving grades, his new friendships. But mostly, I told her about the guilt that still woke me up some nights. "Mom, I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't answered that phone call. If Ethan hadn't been brave enough to dial my number, if I'd decided to respect Delilah's wishes and stay away." I traced her name on the headstone with my finger. How many nights did he sleep in that garage before he called me? How long was he suffering while I was trying to be the good sister who didn't interfere? A soft breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of the oak tree that shaded her grave. I'd never been one for signs or spiritual messages, but something about that moment felt like an answer. You did what you could with what you knew when you knew it. That's all anyone can do. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Winters, the CPS caseworker who had become more friend than professional obligation over the past months. "Wanted to give you a heads up. Delilah has been asking for visitation rights. Are you and Ethan ready for that conversation?" I stared at the message for a long time. Delilah, my sister, who I hadn't spoken to since that day in the courtroom, who had sent exactly 3 cards to Ethan in 6 months. A birthday card, a Christmas card, and an Easter card. Each one signed simply, "Love Mom," with no personal message, no acknowledgement of what had happened, no evidence that she understood why her son was no longer living with her. I texted back, "Let me talk to Ethan and his therapist. We'll get back to you next week." That evening, after Jake and Marcus had gone home and Ethan had completed his room cleaning negotiations, compromise, clean enough that I could see the floor, not clean enough for a magazine photo shoot. I found him in the living room doing homework at the coffee table, a habit he'd developed because he liked having me nearby while he worked. "Ethan, Sarah Winters texted me today. Your mom has been asking for visitation." His pencil stopped moving across his math worksheet. For a moment, he was very still, processing this information with the careful consideration he'd learned to apply to anything involving his biological mother. "What kind of visitation?" he asked, finally. "Supervised visits. Maybe an hour or 2 at the CPS office, with Sarah there to make sure everything goes okay."
Would I have to see Derek too? No, absolutely not. Derek has no legal rights regarding you, and his criminal case is still pending. Any visitation would be just you and your mom. He set down his pencil and looked at me with those serious eyes that still carried too much wisdom for his age. Can I think about it? And maybe talk to Dr. Peterson first? Of course. This is entirely your decision, sweetheart. You don't have to see her if you don't want to, and you don't have to decide right now. What do you think I should do? It was a question he asked me often, this child who had learned not to trust his own judgment because the adults in his life had failed him so catastrophically. We'd been working with Dr. Peterson on helping him rebuild confidence in his own instincts and desires. I think you should do whatever feels right for you, not what you think will make me happy, not what you think your mom wants, not what you think you're supposed to do. What feels right for you? He nodded slowly. I want to think about it, and I want to ask Dr. Peterson if she thinks I'm ready.
The appointment with Dr. Peterson the following week was enlightening in ways I hadn't expected. She'd been working with Ethan for 6 months, helping him process the trauma of abuse and neglect while building healthy coping mechanisms for anxiety and trust issues. Ethan's made remarkable progress, she told me during our joint session. His anxiety levels have decreased significantly, his academic performance has improved, and most importantly, he's developing a strong sense of self-worth and personal agency. What about the visitation question? Dr. Peterson looked at Ethan, who had been listening to our conversation with the kind of focused attention he gave to important discussions about his life. What are your concerns about seeing your mother? She asked him. I'm worried she'll try to make me feel guilty for choosing to live with Catherine. I'm worried she'll tell me Derek misses me and wants me to come home. I'm worried she'll promise things will be different and try to convince me to give her another chance. Dr. Peterson nodded. Those are very reasonable concerns. What would make you feel safe in that situation? If Catherine was there, not just Sarah, but Catherine too, so I know I can leave if I want to. I felt something tighten in my chest. This child still needed me there as his safe person, his protection against manipulation and emotional pressure. That can absolutely be arranged, Dr. Peterson said. And Ethan, I want you to remember something we've talked about. You are not responsible for managing your mother's emotions. You're not responsible for making her feel better about the choices she made. You're only responsible for taking care of yourself. 2 weeks later, we found ourselves in a small conference room at the Department of Children and Family Services, waiting for Delilah to arrive for the first supervised visit. Sarah Winters had explained the ground rules: 1 hour, no discussion of Derek or the living situation, no pressure on Ethan to make any decisions about the future. I sat beside him on a small couch, reading a book while he worked on a handheld video game, both of us maintaining the casual pretense that this was a normal afternoon activity. But I could feel the tension radiating from his small body, and I suspected he could feel mine as well. At exactly 2 p.m., Delilah walked into the room, and I had to suppress a gasp at how much she'd changed. She'd gained back some of the weight she had lost, but something fundamental had shifted in her appearance. Her clothes were neat and clean, her hair was styled, but her eyes held a kind of desperate brightness that I recognized from my years working with families in crisis. "Ethan," she said, her voice carefully modulated, "you look so grown up." He looked up from his video game politely. "Hi, Mom." The greeting was cordial but distant, the kind of tone he might use with a teacher or a neighbor. There was no excitement, no rush of emotion, no joy at seeing the woman who had given birth to him. "I brought you something." Delilah pulled a wrapped package from her purse. "It's that book series you used to like, the one about the boy wizard." Ethan accepted the gift with a quiet thank you and set it aside without unwrapping it. I noticed his hands were steady, no trembling, no visible anxiety. Dr. Peterson had been right about his progress. "How's school?" Delilah asked, settling into the chair across from us. "Good. I made honor roll this semester, and I'm playing soccer now." "Soccer? You never liked sports before." "I like it now. Jake and Marcus are on the team too, and Coach Peterson says I have good instincts for midfield."
That's wonderful. Delilah's smile looked painted on. I'm so proud of you. The conversation continued in this stilted, careful way for another 45 minutes. Delilah asked about his friends, his classes, his interests. He answered politely but without elaboration. He didn't ask her any questions in return. He didn't mention missing her or wanting to spend more time together. He treated her like a friendly acquaintance who was showing polite interest in his life. It was heartbreaking and healthy at the same time. As the visit neared the end, Delilah's composure began to crack slightly. Ethan, I want you to know that I love you very much. I know things have been difficult, but I'm working hard to become a better person. I'm in counseling, and I'm taking parenting classes, and I hope that someday we can spend more time together. Ethan looked at her with those wise, careful eyes. I love you too, Mom. I'm glad you're getting help. But I'm happy where I am now. The finality of that statement seemed to hit Delilah like a physical blow. For a moment, her careful mask slipped, and I saw the raw grief underneath. The loss of her child, the consequences of her choices, the life she'd destroyed through her inability to protect him. I made mistakes. I know I made mistakes. But Derek's changed, and I've changed, and we could be a real family again if you just— Mrs. Morrison, Sarah Winters intervened smoothly. Remember our agreement about topics of discussion. Delilah's mouth snapped shut, but I could see her struggling with the urge to say more, to make promises and pleas that would violate the boundaries of supervised visitation. The hour ended with another polite exchange of pleasantries and a careful hug that lasted exactly 3 seconds. As we walked to our car afterward, Ethan was quiet, processing the experience. How do you feel? I asked as we pulled out of the parking lot. Sad, he said finally. But not sad for me. Sad for her. She looked so empty. It was a remarkably mature observation from a 12-year-old, and it made me realize how much healing he had done to be able to feel compassion for his mother without feeling obligated to rescue her. Do you want to see her again?
Maybe sometimes, like maybe every few months, but I don't want to go back to living with her. I don't want her to think these visits mean I'm going to change my mind about that. That's very clear thinking, sweetheart, and it's completely your choice. 3 weeks later, I stood in family court for the final time, surrounded by the people who had helped us build our new life. Sarah Winters was there, having become almost a family friend. Dr. Peterson sat in the gallery, beaming with professional pride at Ethan's progress. Amanda Chen stood beside me at the defendant's table, reviewing the final adoption papers one last time. Judge Hawkins, the same woman who had awarded me guardianship, looked down from the bench with something approaching warmth. Ms. Hayes, in my 20 years on the family court bench, I've seen many cases of relatives stepping up to care for children in crisis, but I've rarely seen such a complete transformation as what's been documented in this case. She looked at Ethan, who was sitting beside me in his best dress shirt and tie, looking nervous but determined. Ethan, do you understand what's happening here today? Yes, Your Honor. Catherine is going to adopt me, which means she'll be my legal mother and I'll be her legal son. And is this what you want? Yes, ma'am, it is. Ms. Hayes, are you prepared to accept the responsibilities and joys of parenthood for this remarkable young man? I looked down at Ethan, this child who had survived neglect, abuse, and abandonment to become one of the strongest, most resilient people I'd ever known. This child who had taught me that love isn't just about blood relations, but about showing up, staying present, and choosing each other every single day. More than prepared, Your Honor. Honored. Judge Hawkins smiled, a real genuine smile that transformed her usually stern judicial demeanor. Then it is my great pleasure to finalize this adoption. Ethan Hayes, you are now legally and permanently the son of Catherine Hayes. Ms. Hayes, congratulations on your new family. The gavel came down with a satisfying thunk,
And suddenly, everyone was hugging and crying and laughing. Ethan threw his arms around me with the kind of unreserved joy I'd been watching him rediscover over the past months. "I love you, Mom," he whispered against my shoulder, and I felt my heart rewrite itself around that single word. That evening, we celebrated with dinner at his favorite restaurant, a casual Italian place that reminded me, with bittersweet irony, of the family meals we used to have when Delilah and I were children. But this time, there was no walking on eggshells, no careful monitoring of moods and triggers, just a mother and son celebrating the official beginning of what we've been building together for months. "So what now?" Ethan asked as we shared a piece of chocolate cake that was probably big enough to feed 4 people. "Now we keep doing what we've been doing. School, soccer, homework complaints, friend drama, and all the wonderful, ordinary chaos of being a family." "Will you tell people I'm adopted?" I considered this question carefully. "I'll tell them whatever you want me to tell them. You can be my son, or my adopted son, or my nephew who became my son, whatever feels right to you." "Just my son," he said firmly. "That's all anyone needs to know." 6 months later, I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sentence in Delilah's handwriting. "Thank you for saving him when I couldn't save myself." I never responded to the card, but I kept it in my desk drawer as a reminder that sometimes love means letting go, and sometimes it means refusing to let go, and the hardest part is knowing the difference. Today, as I write this, Ethan is 15. He's tall and confident and occasionally mouthy in the way that teenagers are supposed to be. He plays varsity soccer, argues with me about curfew, and fills our house with friends who see me as just another mom, not someone who rescued anyone, not someone who made any extraordinary sacrifices, just mom. He still sees Dr. Peterson occasionally when stress or anxiety spike, but mostly he's learned to navigate the ordinary challenges of adolescence with the resilience of someone who survived extraordinary challenges as a child. He sends Delilah a card on her birthday and accepts her cards to him with polite gratitude. Derek was convicted of child abuse and served 18 months in county jail, a sentence that felt simultaneously too long and not nearly long enough. But the most remarkable transformation has been my own. For 34 years, I defined myself by what I wasn't. Not a wife, not a mother, not someone whose life followed traditional patterns. Now I define myself by what I am. Ethan's mother, a woman who learned that families can be chosen as well as born, someone who discovered that the most powerful phone calls aren't always the ones you make, but the ones you're brave enough to answer. Sometimes I think about that November night when my phone rang with an unknown number. What if I'd let it go to voicemail? What if I'd been too tired, too busy, too wrapped up in my own concerns to answer? But then I look at the young man who calls me mom, who trusts me with his fears and dreams and daily dramas, who has grown into someone strong and kind and whole despite everything he endured. And I realize that some phone calls are bigger than coincidence. Some phone calls are destiny wrapped in crisis, waiting for someone to be brave enough to answer. I'm grateful every day that I picked up. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.